Recently, President Barack Obama commuted the sentences of 46 nonviolent federal drug offenders, which means that they were free from their sentences in prison. Well, Vice recently wrote about a very little-known reform that happened within our justice system that actually does free thousands of nonviolent drug offenders within the federal system. And it's a new reform referred to as Drugs -2. Let me give you some more information about this. Now, currently, there are more than 95,000 federal prisoners serving years, sometimes decades, for drug crimes. Almost 2,000 are serving life sentences without parole, and that's according to the ACLU. Okay. Now, the lesser-known policy that Vice is writing about, it was enacted back in 2014 with far less fanfare. It'll affect 1,000 times the number of people as Obama's commutations. Colloquially known as Drugs -2, the amendment to the U.S. Sentencing Commission's guidelines could reduce the sentences of as many as 46,000 people. Okay? So basically what they're going to do is sort of do away with mandatory minimums, which a lot of drug offenders throughout the country are dealing with right now. So that takes the discretion away from a judge, right? So a judge might deem someone guilty, but might want to give them a lesser sentence, but he or she is unable to do so because there's a mandatory minimum. In one case, there was a 21-year-old by the name of Robert Shipp who was caught selling crack, and he got a life sentence for selling crack, okay? And the judge basically told him, look, I don't agree with this sentence. It's crazy, but this is the mandatory minimum. You're screwed. So that's how our system works right now. And thankfully, this Drugs -2 reform is supposed to mitigate the consequences of that.
You know, when I was younger, I grew up in a suburb where we didn't have issues like this. So if you told me a life sentence for a crack dealer, I was brainwashed into thinking like, oh my God, a crack dealer sounds so dangerous. Well, you know, he's infecting the kids of a new generation with poison and involved in a very dangerous business. And so, of course, he should get a life sentence. Now I'm an adult, okay? It's time to put childish things aside. So in reality, what happens is in some place in the country, you have an industry that is structured around selling drugs, right? Because there's demand for the drugs, not just by, let's say it's a inner city, right? Not just by the people in the inner city, but people who drive in to get the drugs from the suburbs, other parts of the city, etc. There's this enormous demand for it. And so when somebody rises up to service that demand, as happens in every case when you do this, whether it's prohibition or otherwise, then that's totally natural. So that a lot of folks in this situation have no other opportunities. Nobody ever tells them, hey, listen, you study hard, you can go to Harvard. They literally don't know that. All they know is, okay, I knew this guy from around the way and that guy from the corner, and they're the ones who are rich and everybody else is suffering, right? So I'm going to pull myself up by the bootstraps. I'm going to get involved in the local industry. And he does it at whatever young age that he does. Boom, life sentence. But he didn't create the perverted system. He didn't create the lack of opportunity in his situation. Now, does that excuse him?
No.
No, okay. Does that mean he should get a life sentence? Well, that's a different question, isn't it?
Yes, and he absolutely shouldn't get a life sentence. And by the way, let me correct myself. So this reform would actually help people who haven't been given a mandatory minimum. If you've been given a mandatory minimum, you're screwed. If your drug offense was your third strike, you're still screwed. This isn't going to do anything for your sentence. But this reform was meant for people who might have been given ridiculous sentences by judges, and, you know, the reform is supposed to help them out and give them a lesser sentence or commute their sentence altogether. But it's ridiculous that it doesn't affect mandatory minimums because that's the biggest issue.
Yeah. So now a lot of people get on Obama, I think rightfully so, that his commutations that people are hyping up are actually relatively small number and almost never does a pardon. And so historically, it's not like he's a president who's been very merciful. He's picking up steam in that direction, thank God. But you got to give credit where credit is due. This part of the law is very important and does affect a lot of people. So you got to then recognize that he did this well.